everyone, welcome back to another Cloud Lunch and Learn session. Let me know in the chat if you can hear me, if everything's all good. That would be awesome. I can see we've got a number of people watching already, so thanks again for joining us live. Much appreciated. And just checking to see if things are looking good. And I think that they are. So, if everyone could take a second to register to the event, we would very much appreciate it. You can scan the QR code that you see on screen, or you can go to the link that you see scrolling along the bottom and also on screen. And I'll also add the link to the chat. If you register to the event, what do you get? Well, you get free learning materials from Microsoft related to this session, so freebies are always good. And it also helps show the Cloud Lunch and Learn team some love and support as Microsoft sponsor us, so that feedback data to them on how our sessions are doing. So we really do appreciate it if you guys take the time to register to the event. Whether you're watching live now or whether you're watching the recording after, that would be awesome. And just another thing from me, we are creeping closer to our first ever Cloud Lunch and Learn global event, our Cloud Lunch and Learn Marathon. If you have not registered already, please register. Go to Cloud Lunch and Learn, our website, and then /marathon. I'll add that in the chat as well. Our event will take place on the 13th of May, 24 hours of content, multiple languages, lots of opportunities to win prizes. In fact, we'll be doing the first draw for our prizes later this week. What day is this? Wednesday, so it'll be on Friday. So yeah, we really hope to see lots of you there. Also, for every registration we get, we are donating €1 to our chosen charity, so you can read all about that on the website as well. Okay, that's enough from me. Hello, how are you doing, Divya?
I'm doing good, Lisa. How are you? Nice to be here again this week.
Nice to see you again. 2 weeks in a row. And this week, so yes, last week we took a look at the data platform as a whole on Azure and all the services that was made up of. And I must say that was one of the best overview sessions I've seen in terms of all those services and how they work together. And today we are going to dig into more on Azure SQL. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Today the idea is to cover within the data platform umbrella, just go deep on all the services that are tied to SQL.
Amazing. Okay, looking forward to it. Well, without further ado, I will hand over to you. If anyone has any questions throughout, please drop them in the comments and then I can pass them on.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Have an awesome session.
Thanks. All right. So we're gonna be talking about Azure SQL, and the idea is just to go through a quick introduction so we all know what the components in Azure SQLs are and how we can, let's say, use them and which one to use when, right? As we were discussing before with Lisa, last week we covered the overall. Today we are going to more specific to the SQL part, right? And next week, I believe we're gonna go even deeper to one of the services that we're gonna be covering today. So again, for the ones who don't know me, my name is Javier Villegas. I am working at Mediterranean Shipping Company, and I'm heavily involved with SQL Server since a number of years. I am Microsoft MVP in the data platform category, Microsoft certified trainer, and also part of the technical community as a speaker, right? I always like to be part of any community that would like to discuss, share, and network. I am part of also our local group here in Argentina, SQL Argentina, and also part of podcast called Azure en el Bar, in where a group of friends, professional here from the LATAM community, I just speak about technology, and we pass some time together with some people that we invite to our event, basically trying to imagine that we are on a bar, right? Just sharing our favorite beverage, just talking about technology. So Azure and Elbar, I gave you both of the links. Um, uh, Both of them are mostly in Spanish. Azure and Elbar, we used to have what we call Gold Edition, in where we interview some you know people who work for Microsoft. We had Rohan Kumar, Bob Ward, and several. So if you would like to go to our YouTube channel, just you are all invited. Again, my contact information on the left side of the screen. If you want to reach me through email, LinkedIn, or Twitter, and also my blog are there. So in case you want to contact me. All right. So this is what Microsoft has, you know, put all the Azure SQL portfolio in, let's say, a simplified, unique, piece of art, as I like to call it. So you see that we have the SQL Cloud and also three components, right? Let's try to cover and see what these components are. Something that Microsoft is always evangelizing and saying about this is that it's just SQL, right? So all the options that we will be covering today, all the knowledge that we have from the past working on SQL servers, previous version, current version, Transact SQL, everything, it's still valid because, again, it is just SQL, right? We're gonna try to see a little bit more about what is this all about. All right, so something that we're gonna be using as a starting point. This is the portfolio. First of all, SQL servers running on virtual machines. This is a solution that is called infrastructure as a service, in where ourselves, we need to take care of the whole patching, backups, high availability, disaster recovery, right? So we have a virtual machine that we can install from gallery, right? In that gallery, we will see that we have a ton of combination of operating systems, SQL servers, versions, and edition. You know that SQL Server runs in Linux since SQL Server 2017. So we also have all those combinations, right? Including, previous versions like 2008 R2, 2012, etc. The beauty of these galleries, when you deploy one of these virtual machines, is that when you do the deployment, it is following the best practices for SQL. What do I mean with that? You know that we have these best practices that are around since kind of forever, in terms of how we configure the data files, the log files, the location, the tempdb, the memory settings, several things within the SQL Server scope, right? Well, most of them are already pre-configured when we deploy one of these virtual machines from this gallery, right? So we don't have to worry about on how to do this separation of data and logs files and 10db and system databases, right? So this is pre-configured, which is really good, something less that we have to worry about when we are running SQL Server here. Again, infrastructure as a service, right? In where we have to deploy, manage, and really take care of the overall platform, SQL Server, as well as the operating system. Then the second offering within the Azure SQL family is managed instance, right? This is a SQL Server service, right? Hosted in Azure as a service. What do I mean with that? Microsoft provides us with a SQL Server endpoint, right, in where we just connect to it using Management Studio, Azure Data Studio, Visual Studio, the connection string of our web application, whatever, and we don't have any idea what is behind that, right? We don't see the host, we don't see the storage, and we don't have to worry about anything like, in terms of administration and high availability, right? We don't need to do anything related to always on availability group. We don't have to create the clusters and the replicas and do the seeding for the databases, etc. We don't need to worry about setting up a backup strategy with full backups and transaction log backups. We don't need to worry about when to apply a patch on a Windows patch, because again, it's a managed platform. We don't have access to neither a SQL patch, right? Or for example, a cumulative update, because Microsoft is doing everything under the hood, right? What we have for us is, again, a SQL Server endpoint in where we just deploy our databases, we just handle all that, and we connect our application. Since this is SQL, as I said at the beginning, we will see that it's not a SQL Server 2019 running as a service in where Microsoft is taking care of the rest. This is a unique SQL Server version, which is Azure SQL. We will see it later, that when we connect to one of these services and we do select add version, we don't see SQL Server 2016, 17, or 19. We see Azure SQL. So it's a unique platform, right? So again, this is managed instance, is highly compatible with SQL Server, nearly 100%. There are some features that are not totally ready or available in managed instance, but if we have to go and cover the most important one, they are there. We're gonna see them in a minute. If we go back one step, managed instance is the full stack of SQL Server. So we will find that we have SQL Server Agent, Service Broker, transactional replication, log shipping. We can have the all the Transact SQL stack to work and deploy our store procedures, etc. And this is the most recent addition to the Azure SQL family, right? Azure SQL Managed Instance is the most recent one. It has no more than 3 years in the market. This is what we call platform as a service. Additionally to Managed Instance, and also as a managed service, there is Azure SQL Database. This is a unique SQL platform targeted to modern applications. It has a certain set of characteristics that make it unique and a bit different from the others, specifically managed instance. Again, platform as a service, we don't need to worry about the platform, the infrastructure behind it, high availability, backups, etc. Right? Everything is there, so we just need to connect to the Azure SQL database. Right? Then we will see why we have two and how we can choose between one or the other depending on our need. So again, this is the quick summary of what is available. The virtual machine, managed instance. We're going to see that within managed instance and also within database, we have the possibility of setting up a single instance in both cases, or what is called elastic pool for databases or instance pool for managed instance, right? This is something that is going to help us to distribute and share the resources on a better way. We're going to cover that. So in terms of differentiation between infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, each of the offering has its unique set of specifications, right? Memory, IOs, maximum size of the databases, set of features, etc., etc. Different set of high availability, but again, at the end, it's just SQL. All the knowledge we have, we can use it in all the three options. Some of them are going to be more familiar or easy to get into than the other, right? But believe me, at the end of the day, it's just SQL. So again, doing this comparison between infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, uh, we can set and we can remark all the benefits related to platform as a services comparing with infrastructure as a service. First of all, in terms of business continuity and high availability, right? Don't having to set up ourselves the HADR solution for this for the SQL environment that we are setting up without creating the HEs, etc., is something that definitely is gonna relieve us in terms of how we work on this environment. The service will provide us with all this, and depending on how we configure, we can have additional SLA, right? But again, business continuity, high availability is something that is part of the service. Automated backups as well as long-term backup retention is something extremely important. We all know that a backup strategy is not just run a simple backup, right? It's how you do the backup strategy in terms of full backups, differentiation, and transaction log backups, but also on how you store and retain those backups. There are several policies and certification that you have to follow. For example, you cannot have the um, the um, the backup stored on the same location that you have your SQL Server. You have to offload it to a different location in order to be compliant with security. For example, um, in case there is a major disaster, you don't store the backups at the same place that your SQL servers are, right? This is part of the service. There are several set of replications that it's also copying or synchronizing backups between different Azure regions. So you don't have to, let's say, worried about the retention as well. Sheer replication, again, Azure has the different regions in where you can replicate your Azure SQL databases from one side to the other, a managed instance from one region to the other without doing anything under your administration. Don't have to create the window cluster, administer the service account, the endpoint, seeding the HEs. All things are something that we don't have to worry about because it's part of the service with this geo replication. Not only in platform as a service, but also in infrastructure as a service, as well as on many of the other Azure services, right, as we saw before, right? Uh, Scale is a big point on this solution. Why? Because if we have to go by if we have a hardware, right, running SQL Server in our um, company and we need to expand memory, disk, CPU, well, it's something that is not going to be quick, right? We have to go buy the memory, find out the provider, the technician that will do the maintenance, etc. Here in this solution, it's as simple as going to the Azure portal, right? Setting up your new tier. We will see what is that, and adding more um, virtual cores, adding more disk space, changing the disk tiers is something that we can do it really simple from the Azure portal, right? So scaling up in case we need to scale up because of, this particular season we have additional workload, or, let's say that we are hosting an e-commerce solution that requires a certain time of the year, assign more resources to our instance, right? We can do it really, really simple from the Azure portal. We're going to check it out later on. Then all the features related to security, all the ones coming from SQL Server, transparent data encryption, always encrypted, right? All the set of securities features are common for all the offerings. In this case, having the platform running in Azure give us this advanced security, which allow services like advanced threat protection, right, to constantly check the activity on our databases, and if it find any pattern of any strange behavior in terms of usage, it's going to raise an alert and will notify us immediately. Something also really useful is this concept of versionless. As we mentioned earlier, this is not like, again, you have SQL Server 2016, 17, or 19. This is Azure SQL, right? And in several years, maybe we're going to have a major version of SQL Server, right? And we may have to schedule an upgrade, right? In the on-premise world, or if we run it on an Azure SQL virtual machine, right? Or if we're still running an old version of SQL Server 2014, 2016, and we need to do an upgrade, we have to validate the whole thing, we have to test the upgrade, and we have to do the whole in-place upgrade. In Azure SQL Database and Managed Instance, this is versionless. You don't have to worry about those upgrades because, again, Microsoft is applying the fixes and the features and the improvement, the new features and improvements behind the scenes. So you don't have to worry about versioning anymore or upgrades, right? All the upgrades are happening without you knowing in most of the cases, right? Building monitoring, again, and also the intelligent part, right? The building intelligence. This is one more time SQL Server. So features like query store, intelligent query processing, automatic query tunings are part of the offering, right? The three options that we just mentioned. Additionally, at the top of it, right, we have all the metrics coming from the Azure monitoring offering, right, which allow us to have from the portal configure, alerts with certain thresholds to notify different operators, etc. And same for the performance. We can check, certain performance counters directly from the Azure portal. So, and summary, at the top of all the features that we know from SQL Server and we've been using for years in SQL Server, we have the extra set of security, monitoring, and performance that Azure offers us. So, as a summary, now if we have SQL Server running as a service, right, we can focus on our business, right? We don't have to focus anymore on the infrastructure part. So buying hardware, right? Just going through the selection for the hardware, making up a contract with one of the hardware makers, etc., is something that we don't have to worry anymore. Protect our backups, implement disaster recovery and high availability, right? As we just covered, this is part of the service. Those are things that we don't have to worry anymore. Be compliance. Don't worry about malicious users and mistakes. Again, services that allow us to cover all these fronts. Roll out updates and upgrades, right? Not only for SQL, but also for Windows or the platform that we use in case if it is Linux. We don't have to worry about, right? Monitor and troubleshooting, again, part of the service. So we just presented the three offerings, right? Virtual machines, managed instance, and Azure SQL Database. So now Microsoft give us the different tools and services which are going to allow us to assess our on-premise, let's say, application databases in order to have an extensive report of all the things or points that won't be working if we migrate to any of the three destinations in Azure. And also this report will help us to fix those possible problems that may impact us on this move to any of the Azure options, right? So with data migration assistance and Azure Database Migration Service, Microsoft give us all these tools and services. With Database Migration Assistant, again, an application that we download to our workstation with frequent updates on the rules, etc., in where we just select our source, right, and our destination. And when we choose the destination, we can have virtual machine, managed instance, or Azure SQL Database. And based on the destination, it will allow all the databases and the server configuration that we select, right? And will provide it with all this uh, uh, information in order for us to fix this. With Azure Database Migration Service, right, Microsoft gives us the possibility of performing the actual migration. We have two types of migration, the online and the offline. The offline migration is that after we are completely sure that our application works in the destination, in the Azure SQL offering that we choose, right? We have to stop the source, shut down the original SQL server prior taking a full backup, and then full backup or whatever technique we're going to be using, right, to move to Azure. And then we're going to have a downtime, right? Could be minutes, could be hours, right, in order to have our new updated data running in the destination environment. There are some cases in where this migration cannot be offline because we don't have the luxury of having the service down for hours, right? With Azure Database Migration Service, Microsoft also offers the possibility of doing online migration, meaning that is going to set up some sort of replication, right? So at some point, the only thing we have to do is just say, we do failover, we switch to the new environment, and that's it. The downtime will be only few seconds, few minutes in order to do this thing, right? So these two tools are especially Database Migration Assistant, to understand what we have and what we need to do in order to migrate, are the tools that we need to have as a starting point in order to start our migration process. So focusing on virtual machines, right? Microsoft is recently is working hard on adding a set of features that will allow us to have the virtual machines, but in certain cases or for certain features, make it similar to the offering that they have in platform as a service, right? Managed instance or Azure SQL Database. What is that? Well, first of all, we can rely on the patching, right? We can set up like a maintenance window and they will be taking care of applying the patches. For the backups, there are several backups configuration and services that we can set through Azure, so it can take all the necessary backups, right? So we can rely on these tools in order to have the backup strategy, right? In terms of high availability and disaster recovery, There are certain techniques like Azure Site Recovery, in which allow you to take like a snapshot of the whole virtual machine in order to be safe in cases of a major problem happen. But also, and this is a feature that is in preview, you can, let's say, configure the whole high availability with always on availability group within the portal, right? So this is something that you can do through the portal. As we mentioned, the whole set of best practices for configuring the SQL Server itself, including the storage, is part of the offering when we do the provisioning of the virtual machine. This virtual machine, they have a unique um, uh, characteristic that is one of the disk, which is a local disk to the virtual machine, is this that when you shut down the virtual machine, all the content disappear, right? But it's extremely fast. So it is using, I mean, when you configure SQL through these images, it is configuring and placing the TempDB on this particular disk, because again, it's really fast with low latency, right? And you don't need to, if you reboot the VM, you know that the TempDB get recreated on the fly. So it's a perfect fit in terms of, uh, you know, performance and settings for the TempDB. So all these set of features are coming on the virtual machine. Again, a lot of efforts on their end in order to, make some of the offering that the past services have for the VM as well. One of the most recent additions, this resource provider will allow you to manage multiple VMs through the portal, and also enable this backup offering that and the security patches that we just mentioned, right? But also this advanced security offering that Microsoft has, which is called Advanced Threat Protection, right? Which install under the hood on the VM and the SQL a set of components that will be constantly evaluating your SQL Server workload to see if there is any anomaly in terms of usage to have a certain report, right? And constantly auditing how the SQL servers are configured in order for you to have certain recommendation on how to adjust or fix the possible problems that it may find. So these are virtual machines. Then we discover managed instance, right? One of the important things related to managed instance is that initially it was designed to be an extension of your SQL Server that you have in your company, in your local network, but in Azure, right? So the connectivity was something that was private. What do I mean with private? With no access through internet. So the only way you had to connect to a managed instance was having a private link with a VPN connection, or the express route offering that Microsoft give you to have site-to-site networking between your company and the Azure region in where you reside is, right? So those are the things that also were changed, because we're going to check it later, probably next week when we go deeper, right? In some of the changes that happen under the hood of managed instance, basically because the customer were providing feedback to Microsoft, so they were adjusting the offering, right? Again, managed instance, an offering that allows you to connect to a SQL Server endpoint, and you will find all the components that you use in SQL Server. So the migration of your databases from on-premise to managed instance is going to be extremely simple. I will put it that way. Then we have this other offering that we haven't discussed that much, which is Azure SQL Database, right? This is the first offering that was posted as platform as a service, right? And it has certain characteristic that it make it unique. First of all, and to me the most important one, is that you have a unified database as an Azure service. And with unify, I mean that your application, your code, your business logic has to live within one user database, right? So you cannot have, let's say, multiple databases as you have in SQL Server, right? Having, let's say, cross relationship between one and the other. What do I mean? If you have a store procedure, right, which has a code that is doing a select using tables that are located in different user databases. You can do that with SQL Server on a virtual machine. You can do that on managed instance, but you cannot do that on Azure SQL Database, right? Everything has to live within the same user database, meaning all the objects, tables, views, store procedure, functions, the users, etc. Everything has to live within that unique user database, right? So then we can say, hey, but is this a subset of SQL just with one SQL database? The answer is no. It's targeted to a different set of applications. As I said at the beginning, I will say modern applications, right? So here we have, let's say, one of the rules or in how to decide which one we choose, if we choose a managed instance or if we choose an Azure SQL database. Let me tell you something. I have my own rule in order to decide which one to choose for, depending on what you need to migrate, right? Or how your application, uh, or what is let's say, the challenge that you have ahead. For example, if you have a core business application that today is running on any version of SQL Server on-premise, right, which has, this logic that, is spread between different user databases, right, and is, again, your core business application, maybe the faster way and the most secure way to start your journey to Azure is move to a virtual machine running SQL Server, right? Because first of all, it's the same environment that you know, right? But in Azure, so you have your data already in Azure. You can take the opportunity also to migrate from an older SQL Server version to a new version or the latest one, 2019, if necessary. But again, it's the same thing that you've been working on. The migration strategy could be a backup restore, or you can even set up a distribute availability group, right? And when the time comes to do the migration, you just do the failover. Because again, it's a SQL Server, same as you know it, right? That will be the first step. But the same day that you get into production with the virtual machine running SQL Server and your core business application, that's the same day I start checking on managed instance, on how to move this or how to migrate all this to a managed SQL Server, right? To manage instance, right? So with all the benefits that we describe today. If you want to migrate or move this application that we've been talking to an Azure SQL database, again, consider that you have to place everything in a single database. You can do it, right? But there's going to be a lot of, let's say, re-engineering or fixes that you may have to do to your application in order to make it work, right? So I won't be choosing Azure SQL Database for that particular case, right? So the end destination must be managed instance, in my opinion, right? But instead, if you are starting a new project, a new deployment, that you know that it requires a relational database as a backend, Azure SQL Database is the first option that we should be looking at, right? Because again, it has a unique set of specifications pointed to modern application, and we're gonna be seeing what I mean with that. Mm. So now let's talk about a little bit about how to scale all this offering, the platform as a service offering, managed instance, and Azure SQL Database. How do we set it up, right? We have what for managed instance, we have what Microsoft call general purpose. In according to Microsoft, most of the business workloads are perfect or going to run perfectly in this offering, but they also offer the other tier, which is called business critical, right? Which provide you with lower latency on the storage, fast recovery, and a read-only secondary in order for you to offload your read-only workload, right? Um, it is based on the virtual core model, so you have to choose the amount of virtual core that you will assign to your managed instance, right? And general purpose is working with remote storage, but business critical is using local storage, right? That is why it can accomplish lower latency. Mm. On the Azure SQL Database side, initially they started offering the DTU model, right? Database Transaction Unit model. So you choose the amount of DTUs that you want to, let's say, provision to your Azure SQL Database, right? And this is what Microsoft was offering to you. This is something that is still valid, but Microsoft is trying to move away from this DTU model to go to a virtual core model, same as managed instance, right? In where we choose, again, the tier, right? General purpose, business critical, right? Again, the same characteristic, but there is also an additional tier called hyperscale, right? So, which is a tier which is intended to big databases, right? In where you need to be able to scale in terms of storage a lot, right? So you can place here big databases, hundreds of terabytes of data in your user database in this hyperscale solution, giving you all the features that we mentioned before: high availability, disaster recovery, patching, backups, etc., etc., etc. Something that we do see also in Azure SQL Database, which is not present in the other Azure SQL offerings, is the possibility of have what Microsoft call serverless. What do I mean with serverless? In an Azure SQL database, right, you can build your application, you can provision your Azure SQL database and configure it as a serverless. If the service detects that there is no utilization for a certain period of time that you define, right? The service go into, let's say, a pause mode or a sleeping mode. So it is detaching the storage and the compute just remove it and grant it and Microsoft use it for something else, right? So you don't have service, right, for this amount for this period of time, meaning that you are not paying for the compute, you are only paying for the storage. But then the service is smart enough to detect when there is an incoming connection to your Azure SQL database, right? And under the hood will resume the Azure SQL database, right? And from that point, it will continue operating until, again, detects that there is no activity and pause it again, right? You can choose this option or not. Of course, is for a certain set of application that can, support this model, right? For example, when you deploy your application, you have to, let's say, make sure that it will retry the connectivity even if it doesn't find that the SQL Server is alive, because under the hood it could take a couple of seconds in order to spin it up again. So this is the offering which is called serverless. In terms of hardware, right, Microsoft is offering what they call Gen 5, in where we can choose from 4 virtual core up to 80 virtual cores, right? Depending on our needs, we can choose 4, 8, up to 80, right? And also is working on what they call the future generations in order to provide more possibility to scale, right? For example, up to 128 virtual cores, right? So this is something that is in preview for certain offerings, right? Uh, Okay, so now we have our managed instance, we have our Azure SQL Database. How do we have interfaces for this? First of all, as we've been discussing here, the portal in where we create the service, and then in where we can manage most of the service. Then we can use uh, Management Studio or Azure Data Studio in order to connect. We know Management Studio is a tool that all ourselves at DBA has been using forever. Azure Data Studio is the new tool that is multi-platform, so you can use it natively in Windows, Mac, and Linux to connect to Azure SQL, right? And also you can use the interfaces like PowerShell, SQL CMD, BCP, etc., which are multi-platform. So a quick summary here, right? This is SQL Server, the world's best database, right? And the offerings include virtual machine, something that we are really used to. Uh, those SQL servers running on Azure virtual machines, which allow us to be 100% compatible with the SQL Server we use. Managed instance, right? So giving you the power of SQL Server plus the benefit of a platform as a service solution, right? And Azure SQL Database for modern cloud application with all the benefit of a PaaS offering, right? So we will see them in action, right? So we'll see what we can understand from here. I am connected in my Azure portal with my account, and if I go to Azure SQL, I will see all the offerings that I have here. Right now, I only have provision a virtual machine running SQL Server 2019 Developer Edition. If I go there, I see, you know, all the information related to the host, the service, and SQL, right? For example, it's telling me the usage in terms of data, logs. We can also see activities related to CPU usage, memory consumption, etc., etc. We can configure the patching here, as we said earlier. The backups, right? Again, we can specify to do the automated backups or not, and if we decide to allow the Microsoft to take care of this, we can specify encryption, include or not the system databases, and configure an automated schedule, or ourselves we come up with our own schedule. This is what I was saying before. As a preview feature, you can configure high availability. So if you have 2 virtual machines, right, you can create the availability group, the listener, and the whole thing from the portal. Here is telling us that it's not, it's not meeting all the prerequisites, so we cannot do it from here. But we can also create a new Azure SQL component, right? And when we do that, we see what we saw in the slide before. We can choose Azure SQL Database, we can choose a managed instance, or the SQL Server running on a virtual machine, right? Again, with a ton of uh, combination of SQL Server versions, edition, and Windows or Linux platform, right? You see here SQL Server 2019 running on Red Hat, Ubuntu, and SUSE as well. Mm. But today we will go to configure an Azure SQL database. So I will go to hit create here. You have to specify your subscription, right? And a resource group. The resource group is, again, a logical grouping of multiple Azure resources, not only Azure SQL. You can, group and assign any kind of Azure resources to the resource group, which will allow you to uh, manage them together. And eventually, if you need to delete all those resources, you just go and delete the resource group, and with that, it's going to take all those resources offline and delete them, right? We have to specify the database name, right? This is the database name, so let's call it uh, Cloud 01, right? And we have to specify a server, right? When we have to specify a server, this is a logical server. In where we gonna be using it to connect to, right? But in reality, what it has all the power is the database itself, right? But again, we need to define the server. So we're gonna here create new. We have to specify um, a server here. So we will call it Javier, right? It's going to check if it is available or not. Cloud, launch and learn. Here we go. We're going to specify login, the sysadmin login, right? Let's say Javier, and a password. It has to be really complex, right? And then it's going to check. And finally, you have to choose in which region you're going to deploy this logical server, right? So let's specify East US. So we go OK, right? And now we have this server that then we can use the same if we have to host multiple, right, Azure SQL databases. Remember that I said that your application has to live in one unique Azure SQL database, but that doesn't mean that you can have multiple databases to serve different applications or business purposes, right? Then you can use what is called elastic pool. This is a way that Microsoft gives you to, let's say, you have a certain set of resources that you can share between multiple Azure SQL databases, right? So you can grant some of the resources to one and the other, and then play with how you, let's say, assign those resources. You can assign some resources to one in a fixed schedule or something dynamic, etc. So for now, we're going to leave it there. Then we're going to choose the compute plus storage. Again, this is for the database that we are creating. So here we go into the tiers options that we have, right? Again, general purpose, business critical, and hyperscale. We choose this from here. All the time here we get the estimated cost that we will have to pay monthly. This is in Argentinian pesos right now, right? And if we are looking for the previous DTU modeling, right, we can go to the old modeling. Again, Microsoft is not recommending it or trying to get away from this. So with basic, standard, and premium, and we check, right? We select the amount of DTUs that we want for our Azure SQL database, as well as the database size, right? Here we have an explanation of how Microsoft, what is a DTU for Microsoft and how it will imply to us in order to define it. But again, highly recommend to go to the new B-Core modeling, right? So we're going to check general purpose, right? And here we have the two options, as we mentioned earlier. Provision, right? This is that it's going to be all the time available, right? Or serverless, in where you can, if there is no usage, put the service into some sort of pause, right? Let's go with a provision one. We can choose again the amount of B cores and memory we're gonna be assigning to this. So we choose this one, and then within this family we check the amount of virtual core and the size, right? When we define all we have, we just hit apply, and we have it, right? This is going to be important because if in the future we need to scale or change any of the specs, we go to the Azure portal, and from there we just change, we assign more disk, we assign additional virtual cores, we change the tier, right, from business critical to hyperscale eventually, right? So we can do everything and scale really quickly and dynamically from here, right? So then we go to the networking, in where we can choose how we're going to be connecting, if it's going to be with a public endpoint or a private endpoint. So let's choose the public endpoint for now. Security, right? Enable Azure Defender for SQL. This is an additional service which, give you an extra layer of security for the activity that it may, fund. Additional settings, like, for example, collation. You can specify the collation and also specify the maintenance window, assign some tags, and when it's ready, you just go hit create, and in shortly, you're going to have your Azure SQL database. You will see the whole connection string in the portal, and you can use it in your application, in Management Studio, or in, Visual Studio if you are deploying, right? So this is, a set of services. I mean, the whole thing, Azure SQL, which is constantly evolving, and Microsoft is, adding features constantly all the time. So stay tuned with the documentation, with the news, with the updates, because all the times there are additional features or things for you to try and use, right? Every 6 months, you will see that the service is really evolving with a bunch of new things. Here, I'm just leaving a QR code for you to go directly to the Azure Fundamentals Learning and Docs page, in where you can have, a follow-up for all this introduction that we just did, right? More deeper in each of the 3 offerings I just mentioned, right? In different use case, migration techniques, and more specific to the features. And with that, we just finish the presentation. Again, leaving my contact information if you want to follow up offline. And if there is any question, Lisa.
Awesome. There's no questions, but we've had a good amount of viewers that joined us at the beginning and have stuck through. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Please do make sure that you register. I've popped the link in the chat and the comments. You'll receive free Microsoft Learning materials for this session, and it helps our sponsors, Microsoft, know who's attending and enjoying our sessions. And we will be back next week for the third and final session of the series. And we're going to look at the evolution of Azure SQL. Is that right?
Yeah. As a service. So we're going to be going more details on Azure SQL Database and how to provision it, how to do a live migration, etc. So we're going to be, one level deeper into the Azure SQL family. Yeah.
Awesome. I really love this approach. I think it's great. Chris said, thank you guys. Andrew said, great. That was a great session, great follow on from last week. Thanks for joining, everyone. And we'll see you back next Wednesday, same time. Yeah. Thanks, Javier.
All right. Thank you, Lisa.
Next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.